Okay, so let's start with part B. We've looked at the structure of DNA in a lot of detail now, and now we can broaden our view to look at some of the other structures in a cell and how they relate to DNA. So let's talk about chromosomes. I'm sure you've heard of them and you probably remember what they are. DNA, because it's carrying so much code, is an extremely long molecule. And to give you an idea of how long it is, each of your cells has about a meter of DNA in each cell. Now, that seems like quite a lot, considering that our cells are microscopic. But if you were to take all the DNA from all of your cells and add it end to end, then the total distance, the total length of DNA from all of the cells in your bodies would stretch not just to the sun, 150 million kilometers, but to the sun and back many times. Therefore, it's kind of tricky stuff, having this huge length crammed into an extremely small space. 1 meter crammed into a cell which is only a few thousandths of a millimeter across. So when it gets copied, there is a danger of tangling. And to avoid this, the strands of DNA get coiled up into much more compact structures, which are called chromosomes. Now, I find the easiest way to think of chromosomes as being a little bit like a jumper. If anyone has seen a jumper being knitted, you'll know that you start with a very long strand of wool, and it gradually gets knitted together into this very compact shape called the jumper, but the jumper is made up of this long string. And so chromosomes are little compact jumpers, quote unquote, knitted together from long strings of DNA. You've probably seen pictures like this. If you look carefully, there's a whole bunch of little structures, sort of X-shaped things, and each one of those is a chromosome. Well, the chromosomes are not just made of DNA. They also have proteins as part of them, and the proteins are called histones, and histones help the DNA long string keep in the chromosome shape. Each chromosome has a very consistent shape. In fact, it's so consistent that a scientist, a biologist with the correct equipment can take pretty much any cell in your body, find the DNA in the nucleus, and work out and match up exactly the name of each of the particular kinds, or the identity of each of the particular kinds of chromosomes with the actual cells that are in your body. So they're very consistently knitted together with the help of these histone proteins. And let's look here. We have a chromosome. There's your X shape. And what's the X shape from? Well, it's from a carefully knitted together string, but the string itself, if we come back here, we can see there's the histone proteins holding the DNA double helix strand into its folded or knitted shape. And then the folded knitted shape is folded again and then again, until you get this very compact form called a chromosome. Another major molecule, another major structure that we have to discuss when covering genetics is RNA. And RNA helps DNA to do its job of coding for proteins. Remember that the job of DNA doesn't do anything on its own. It is a code that is translated or converted into a useful molecule, or a set of useful molecules called proteins. But remember how when we used the analogy of a recipe book, the recipe book doesn't do anything. It just gives instructions to the machinery. And in the case of a recipe book, I'm the machinery. The person. The cook is the machinery. In the cell, there's lots of parts to the machine, and one of those parts is RNA. RNA obviously sounds like DNA, and if you remember that DNA has a deoxyribose sugar as part of each monomer, well, RNA is ribonucleic acid. So not deoxyribonucleic acid, just ribonucleic acid, which means it hasn't lost. Its sugars are not missing an oxygen. We know, of course, we've seen now that DNA is a double strand or a double helix, but RNA is a single strand. We're not going to go into RNA fully here. There's a lot to talk about, so much that we need another lesson to talk about it. But you do need to know that it's there. And of course, because it's so related to DNA, it's a good time to bring it to your mind. Okay, well, that's enough about the molecules. Where do we find DNA? Well, we know that it's in the nucleus, but the nucleus, saying that DNA is in the nucleus, assumes that you have a nucleus. And if you cast your mind back to our cell biology lessons, you know that not all cells have a nucleus. There are primitive, simpler cells called prokaryotes, which do not have any membrane-bound organelles, including a nucleus. They have no nucleus, no mitochondria, no chloroplasts, no Golgi apparatus, etc. So prokaryotes don't have a nucleus in which they store their DNA. The DNA is in fact just a circular chromosome, so one ring of DNA with no histones. They call it a chromosome, but it's not knitted together. It just floats around in the cell. And there's an example of one right there, a single circular strand of DNA. That's an electron microscope image. Electron microscopes don't take color photos, but once you know what you're looking for, you can use false color later on to highlight what you're looking at. So this reddish ring around here is the single chromosome loop in a prokaryote. And prokaryotes, we're talking about bacteria. For eukaryotes, most of the DNA is found as chromosomes in the nucleus. Well, we all know that by now. Excuse me. However, there is DNA found in other parts of the cell as well. And you may have heard of mitochondrial DNA. And that is to say that in your cells, not only is there DNA in the nucleus, there's another set of DNA in your mitochondria. Remember that they are the organelles that release energy from glucose and other molecules, so to turn it into ATP. And then in plants and algae, they also have DNA in another place, in their chloroplasts, which of course are the organelles responsible for photosynthesis. Now, there's quite a lot that could be said about both of these, but we're not going to go into detail here. All you need to know is that although the majority and the most commonly discussed and most directly important DNA is found in the nucleus, in chromosomes, there is other DNA in other organelles. Just as a little aside, since we're here, I've got that sentence there, DNA in the non-nuclear organelles, so mitochondria and chloroplast, has many similarities to that in prokaryotes. And one of the hypotheses is that once upon a time in a land far, far away, one tiny little cell got gobbled up or engulfed or invaded, whichever way you like to look at it, a larger cell and survived inside. And eventually that little cell inside, excuse me, became in a sort of symbiotic way, became a mitochondria or became a chloroplast. And this theory is called endosymbiosis, the idea that small unicellular organisms invaded or engulfed by larger unicellular organisms and then took on the roles in this kind of subcellular symbiosis, the roles that we would now call the roles of mitochondria and chloroplasts. All right, well, that's the content. Here's a couple of resources for you to consider. The crash course in biology is very well done, but like normal, Hank Green races along at great speed, so it really is useful and entertaining as revision, but I don't suggest it as your first point of reference. And I also suggest that you only watch up to the 8-minute 53 mark, because he goes into material that we're not going to cover until the next lesson. Then you've got Pearson chapter 5, and I've given you some page references there. Note that the page references there apply to all the material from this lesson and the last one about DNA. There's a little DNA matching game there just for your entertainment if you wish. And then finally, we have the questions that I want you to complete in Pearson. So there's 5 questions there spread across 2 pages.